Hello everyone, I'm Keith Platfoot with K'Aviation. Today I'm going to show you how to log a flight in Smart Logbook. So let's imagine that we've just finished a commercial flight from KCMH John Glenn Airport in Columbus, Ohio, and we've just landed here in KATL, Hartsfield-Jackson International in Atlanta. So we're going to walk through how we would log this flight in Smart Logbook. So we're starting out here on the flight list screen. This is the opening screen in the app. And as you can see, we don't have any flights logged yet. So we're going to tap the plus button in the top right to begin logging that first flight. And this brings up the flight editor. And you'll notice there are a number of fields here for logging different attributes of the flight. So we're going to work top to bottom here. Let's start with the date. By default, the date is set to today. Now, if we wanted to tap this, if we were logging a previous flight, we can just tap that row. We can switch that date to something else, and then tap again to close it. The next field down is flight number. We tap that field, and this opens up a number pad where we can enter the flight number. And in this case, we're going to use 5806. You'll notice there's a change keyboard button here, and this is useful if, say, you wanted to add the airline prefix. So we could change to an alphanumeric keyboard if we wanted. Let's go ahead and close that and move down to the aircraft fields. So there's aircraft registration and aircraft model. Now we're just going to tap the aircraft registration field here to set that, and you'll see that that will also set the model field. So let's tap that. And this takes us to the aircraft screen. Now, we don't have any aircraft added yet. So again, let's tap plus and add our first aircraft. And there's just a few fields here. We're going to first enter the aircraft tail number here. And we're going to use 410 Whiskey November. And then we're going to set the aircraft model. So let's tap that field. And this takes us to the aircraft model list. And again, we don't yet have any aircraft models defined, so we need to add our first one. Let's tap plus again at the top. And this opens up the model editor. So the first field we need to enter here is the aircraft type. So let's give this aircraft the identifier for the Boeing 737. And below that, there's a number of different fields for our aircraft models. And we'll get into some of this in a later video. For now, let's just populate one of these fields. Let's mark this as a multi-engine land aircraft. So we select that row, and then let's tap done to return to the aircraft. So now we have the registration and the model. We'll tap done one more time to return to the flight editor. And as you can see, we now have the registration and model field populated for our flight. Moving on down to the route fields, we have our departure and arrival airports here. We're going to tap the first one here, the from field. And this takes us to the airport selection screen. And you can see that the very first time we do this, the app is going to ask us if it's okay to use our location. And as you can see in the message, what it uses the location for is to try to automatically detect which airport we're located at. So we can go ahead and allow that. We'll say allow while using the app, so we don't need to answer that again. And you can see here that it's pulled up our current location as KATL, and it's using the phone's GPS to determine this. Now for this flight, let's imagine we just landed at KATL, so we actually need to enter our departure airport. And to do that, we're going to type in the code here in the search field. So the code for John Glenn Airport is KCMH. We type that in. There it is. We tap that row, and we have our from field populated. Let's go ahead and get the arrival airport. Now this time, we can take advantage of that automatically detected current airport, and we can just tap the KATL row here and populate that. So now we have our route. I'm going to move down now to the times. You can see we support all the standard out, off, on, in times. For this flight, we're just going to populate the departed and the arrival time. So let's set the departed time first. Now this was a morning flight. We left at 8:30 a.m. Now the default for Smart Logbook for commercial pilots is to log these in the standard Zulu time zone. So we're actually going to log our departure time here as 1230 Zulu. And let's move down to the arrive time. And we arrived at 10:05 local, which is 1405 Zulu. And we tap done. So we've got our times populated, and you'll notice immediately that by setting these times, we now automatically have our flight time down here in the duration section populated for us. That's an hour and 35-minute flight. We also have an additional duration field here, this pilot and command time. And this is the default for new users of Smart Logbook. Now, of course, there are a whole number of different duration fields that we can choose from. And if we tap the add duration field here, we can see some of those. And you can see all the built-in types here. If you're, say you're the first officer, you're probably going to be logging second in command time. If you're a student pilot, we have dual received, maybe solo time, and a whole host of other kind of common types. I should also mention that if you need additional types, it's easy to do that. We have the add custom field option down here at the bottom. Now for this flight, we're just going to add one additional field. We're going to keep the pilot and command time, but also log some instrument time. So let's tap that row to turn on that field, return to our flight, and you can now see that we have an instrument duration added. Now for this flight, let's imagine that we hit some weather coming into Atlanta. So we want to log 30 minutes of instrument time. You'll notice here that we're logging that time in hours and minutes. Again, this is the default for commercial pilots, but there is also an option for GA pilots to instead log time as hours and tenths. So we're going to tap done here. These are all of the times that we need to log for this flight. So we can move down to the takeoff and landings. And of course, we have all of the standard. We have the takeoff and landings divided both by day versus night. This was a day flight, so we had 1 day takeoff and 1 day landing. I'm going to move down now to approaches. So let's tap add approach, and you can see here again, Smart Logbook supports many of the common instrument approach types that you may want to log out of the box. And of course, you can also add custom types using the option there at the bottom. For this flight, we're going to just log one ILS approach that we made at Atlanta. Now, once we've added that approach, we can tap that row, and we can add additional information about the approach, such as, let's say the runway that we used, and that was 27 right. We return to the flight, and now we have our approach fully logged. The next section down is crew members. So we can add a crew member. Now we're going to start adding a crew member by adding the crew position. And there's a number of positions here, and as always, we can add custom positions if we need to. For this flight, we're just going to add a position for our first officer. So let's tap that row, and there's a field now for our first officer. We tap that row, and we go into our crew member list. Now, because this is, again, the first time we've used Smart Logbook, we don't yet have any crew members added. So let's tap plus and add our first one. So for this flight, we're just going to use a fictional crew member named John Smith. We enter his name here. You'll see that you can also add notes for crew members as well as a photo if you so choose. For now, we're going to tap done. This takes us right back to the flight editor, where we've specified John Smith as our first officer on this flight. So last but not least, we have the remarks section. And of course, we can enter anything we want to that's relevant to the flight here. For now, we're just going to make a comment here on how well the landing went and just say that we made a perfect landing there in Atlanta. And go ahead and close that field. So that's it. So we've now logged all of the basic information for our flight, and you can see how fast and efficient that process was. And in the next video, we will take a look at some additional features and options for logging flights in Smart Logbook. But for now, we're just going to tap done to save this, our first flight, which you can now see showing up in our flight list, our flight there from KCMH to KATL. So I hope this has been a useful introduction for you for logging flights in Smart Logbook. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to reach out to us at feedback@thesmartlogbook.com. Thank you.